and it was probably about 14, and I was like, what do I do? Like, I can't get on the phone. I didn't realize I'm a child. And actually cold emailed a lot of them and ended up sitting down with Gary Vaynerchuk, sat down with Kevin Rose, Phil Libben, the CEO of Evernote at the time. At one point, I designed like one screen for a UI of an app, and I got paid $50. And the guy gave me like a $20 tip. I was like 14, and I've never since felt as rich as I did that day. Team size is such a vanity metric. At the time I finished that session at 10:30, we'd lost 50% of our clients.
Hello and welcome back to the StoreHero podcast. This week I'm joined by another esteemed guest, my co-founder Karl O'Brien. Today we're going to jump through and actually just talk through a little bit about Karl, his background, the agency, and yeah, we'll get into it.
Yeah, I'm not a very hard guest to book, to be honest. Very accessible, but hopefully some value to provide either way.
Have your full access to your full calendar, so there's no getting away from it.
No,
I'm looking
no
forward to doing
excuse.
this one.
100%. We had a good episode a couple of weeks ago where we dove into some of the origin stories on your side with regards to e-commerce from a slightly different perspective. I know it's something that we kind of tease as part of initial conversations, that we're both coming at StoreHero from two different perspectives, one from an agency side and one from the Shopify and kind of family e-com side. So I'm sure hopefully that it's a quick enough introduction, and then we kind of move on to more important stuff, into substantive stuff sometimes. So be good to kind of dive in and get into the weeds a little bit more.
Start from the start. So even prior to your agency, what were you at? How did it kick off?
Sure. So I think I was always very interested in doing something a bit different. I kind of didn't really ever have a proper job. And even when I was in school, I'd had an interest in graphic design, and that was kind of my first intro into business, I suppose, in general. There was always this is probably 2000 and, well, to be honest, I think I suppose there's a line to which you might say, okay, that's a real business. Like, there was a couple of things over the years when I was growing up in terms of small, odd businesses, like service-based businesses, like washing cars, all that kind of little stuff. But I think definitely kind of graphic design and stuff was always something I was interested in.
Was it
I was
Photoshop
interested in
or what kind of tools were you using? Just curious, like what
Yeah,
year
it
are we
was.
talking here?
So it's probably starting in probably 2010, I would say, or 2000. If not, it actually a little bit more. It's all a bit of a blur now. But I suppose I kind of was very interested in art, but I wasn't purely artistically minded. It was a means to an end, because I saw that as maybe an opportunity where I had a little bit of a skill that I could transfer into something that was a little bit more economic, maybe, than being an artist. And I didn't really have the temperament for that. But yeah, like this was early days. I was all the kind of weird stuff like LimeWire and uh, every like random piece of software, or like uh, weird part of the internet that probably a lot of entrepreneurs, especially anything digitally minded, kind of started, and it was kind of acted as a bit of a starting point. So I suppose one of those kind of key areas, again, this is one of my first businesses, I would say, was on Bebo. So people might might remember before, probably between, like, MySpace didn't really have a big life
Yeah.
over here, in probably Europe in general.
Bebo
So
was
Bebo was
massive in Ireland.
so big. I think at one point, I know recently people have talked about like Revolut having such a high percentage of the Irish population. I'm sure Bebo is something very similar, especially within that particular cohort. Everyone had Bebo, and
Hopefully those Bebo pages never resurface.
oh my God, that's another conversation. Yeah, so myself and a friend used to make Bebo skins, if anyone can remember that. So before boring Facebook came along that said everyone's profile had to be the same, you could kind of create different art and themes for your page. It was a great business to the extent. The pros of that business, I would say, was I kind of build up 100,000 views on my profile. All these kind of, it was kind of a very active profile, because people knew I made these Bebo skins. The only problem is I was making Bebo skins for people, and I was charging a fake currency.
We're not
Was not
talking
getting any money.
crypto.
No crypto. This was like even less justifiable, which was Bebo. Like, you used to have love on Bebo, which I built up plenty of that, and then I was like, actually, this is no use to me. So that's probably when my first commercial business started to kind of shift, and I said, okay, well, actually, I need to make something out of this. Now, funny enough, I ended up meeting Michael Birch, the founder of Bebo, on a random
Yeah.
street in Dublin. There was a meetup for one of the first years of the Web Summit, which was called like the Founders Summit or something. It was like the speakers from the Web Summit had like a separate mini event in the Shelburne, and they kind of walked by him on the street. And of course, I was the only one who would recognize who he is. He just sold Bebo for $850 million to AOL
Wow.
and around this time. And I yeah, it was funny enough, a funny chat with him at the time. And obviously, if anyone knows the story, he ended up going on or back to buy back Bebo for like $1 million.
He stopped to talk to you on the street as probably a 12 or 13-year-old.
100%, yeah. And I actually had a picture with him, myself and my mate. I could never find again, but yeah, it was a bit mad. So his story is pretty incredible. I think, anyone who's kind of interested in a business podcast, he went on to start this thing called Monkey Inferno, which is like a startup incubator. And Shan from My First Million end up running that incubator for him. But in any case, Bebo died a bit of a death. It was kind of given to AOL in return for that hefty sum, and AOL pretty much destroyed it very quickly. So was one of the, I had the wrong end of the stick with that. So at that point, I was like, okay, I need to actually have a proper business. So I started when I moved into freelance design, graphic design, and used a website called Elance. It was kind of an early equivalent to kind of,
Upwork
you know,
or one of those.
exactly, Fiverr and all these different kind of online job boards that it kind of morphed and rebranded a couple of times. But basically, I would put up kind of jobs that I could do. Or people would put up jobs. I want to design a business card, all these different things, and I would kind of jump in and kind of with a portfolio, and it was absolutely insane. Like I would do a piece of work. I remember at one point I designed like one screen for a UI of an app, and I got paid $50, and the guy gave me like a $20 tip for like an hour's work when I was like 14, and I've never since felt as rich as I did that day. It was just like, now equally, that was the first moment I learned my pricing power and pricing strategies weren't consistently as good for the 10 years after. Uh, After like there was situations where I'd spend hours on something just for no money, but I had such flexibility, and I was like, I remember my parents at the time were thinking like, you need to probably as the years went on in school, you need to go get a part-time job. Like you're sitting at a computer, you haven't left the house. Clearly, this isn't working. And they didn't really believe me. So
Yeah, I bought
at
the
that,
house.
yeah, not just yet. I kind of said to them at one point, I think I kind of started to, I started to listen to them, which was a terrible idea in hindsight, and said, okay, I actually better put some CVs around. Went around Swords in Dublin and put a few CVs in. Got absolutely no response except for one who said, "We actually we're not hiring at the moment, but we see you've done this design stuff. Will you build us a website?" So it's like, I am right. I'm going back to my room. I'm not leaving the house, and that's
See
what I
you and
did for the
touch
next
it.
couple of years. Exactly. I had enough of it, a bit of a uh, added to gave me a little bit of an ego, enough of an ego boost anyway to kind of keep going. So really,
What
the
year are we
next,
talking
yeah,
now?
this is probably 2013, I would say.
13. Okay, yeah.
So I remember doing my leaving cert in maybe 2012. I'm probably mixing these dates up, something around there. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I would basically come home from school, go to a library to study until maybe 8, and then from 8 to 12, I would work on this freelance stuff on the side and kind of do that again and again. And I remember I was even actually thinking about this the other week. Like I've consistently had this idea in my head that tomorrow I'm going to be more organized. It goes back to then. I was like, it's always the same. I'm sure every entrepreneur and everyone in kind of leading the way, an operator in any context feel the same. So
Is the
yeah,
freelance work here still like off this Fiverr type website, or have you got consistent clients at this stage?
this is very random. Like, and one
Yeah,
thing that the nature of those kind of Fiverr style projects is I never actually started by working with Irish clients, really. I was
okay.
working with clients internationally. I remember one time I was doing a project for a large architectural firm. They did a lot of projects for the Australian government. The company was based in Sydney, and I would kind of chat to them over kind of Skype, just kind of instant messaging on Skype. And at one point, they were like, we need to jump on a call because we're going to do this bigger website project. There was going to be a couple of grand. And
So
I was like, what?
you were building the whole website for this Australian company that was working with the government.
And it was probably about 14. Uh, And I was like, what do I do? Like, I can't get on the phone. I didn't realize I'm a child.
Get a fake mustache or something.
Jesus. And to be honest, only for the fact that I started to grow a bit of facial hair, I would still look about 12. But at that point, definitely that was a problem. I think for whatever reason, I end up getting, I end up figuring it out. And yeah, live to fight another day, I think, and kept
So
that
what?
project. And
They jumped on the call and realized that you weren't the the 30-year-old man that they thought you were, and you were actually a 14-year-old boy.
yeah, exactly. I think I'd probably done enough at that point where they were like, yeah, to be fair to them, oh well, if it's worth what's if it's not broken, I'll
Were they
fix it.
shocked when they saw you, or
I
did they
think
see you?
so. I think so. Yeah, I think it was I remember specifically. Um, yeah, the guy was like, oh, hello, and I was like, yeah, I can't actually remember specifically what the conversation went like, but I remember specifically there was like a, oh well, okay moment. But to be fair
Because
to
you
him,
had
he kind of
joined the
trusted me.
call.
Exactly, yeah. It wasn't my child on the go, but yeah, enough credibility had been built anyway in the couple of bits of work that we had done to date, and end up kind of going from there. So like, even going back to the kind of Bebo store, I remember between myself and my friend, we had like a couple of, again, absolutely no commercial value in this, but it was pretty exciting to be like probably 11 or 12 and have like Liverpool Football Club. I had no interest in football, but they were using our Bevo skin. Flo Rida
Oh, really?
was using our Bevo skin we
Did he
made for
pay you the
him.
three loaves?
He paid me the 3 loaves. Oh, nobody gets a discount now. It's all full price. And then who else was it? You know, he unfortunately had passed on before this, but the Bob Marley official Bevo page was also using
Wow.
white skin as well as so it was no it was tough at the top, but where can you go from there is the logical next question, but
We'd have to
we
get them
found a
all
way.
as Store Hero customers now. What's the
Oh,
next thing?
that's it 100%. But yeah, so like, and that's kind of jumping back a little bit, but on the freelance basis it was kind of interesting, like end up doing work for, you know, a company that was kind of like an equivalent of free now across Europe, kind of instead
Yeah.
of an Uber model, it was actually built on top of the existing taxi infrastructure called Pergo and eTaxi USA. We did work with them, end up building a website for the University of Michigan when I was probably about 13. Random projects that were pretty exciting, and it gave me a ton of flexibility, you know, through school for the most part, and kind of nice little projects that meant that I never had to get a proper job.
Just like with a University of Michigan website, I assume like you must have been able to charge for, websites like that, I'm assuming. Or I'm surprised these guys were going through freelance channels to get websites for built for such organizations.
Yeah, so like anything, it's kind of driven by referrals, and I suppose that's a kind of
Yeah, fair.
you know, the nature of an agency setup. So I remember it was kind of a spin-off site, not the full Michigan site, but the School of Business at the time was kind of substantial enough as an entity in and of itself. So they kind of needed a site for the whole university, and they kind of updated it every year. They had big conferences, and one thing that stood out to me was like they had massive speakers because the alumni of these kind of larger universities across the US just built so much goodwill amongst its, to encourage them to come back. So people like, remember Stephen Ross, who owns the Miami Dolphins, used to speak every year. And I had randomly loads of pictures of these people saved on my computer. So I had to like edit the graphics and put up the speaker list and all this kind of stuff. But all that kind of freelancing stuff meant that I kind of, very early on, because I didn't have any kind of commitments or kind of bills to pay, I could actually test and try projects. I didn't actually have to make decisions with a particular mortgage bill hitting the account on the fifth of the month or whatever the case may be. So with that in mind, I was able to kind of pick and choose the projects I wanted. And kind of by the time I actually was kind of finishing my leaving cert, I was like, I'd actually done a lot of the stuff that maybe people kind of do at the kind of mid level, mid area of their career. To go into a corporate job, they want to kind of get that flexibility, and wherever they go from there, I'd say gotten that into my system for better or for worse in some ways. That as soon as I actually started college, I kind of started with one foot out the door nearly, because I knew um, I didn't want to kind of fall into a typical trap, and I want to do something a bit different.
Were you tempted to not go to college?
Very tempted, but I think the nature of the course I did, which was a marketing degree in DCU, was kind of very low. Dublin City University, for anyone who's not Ireland based, was a very low commitment in terms of hours. So it meant that I actually didn't necessarily need to make a sacrifice in terms of kind of number of hours. I think I was good enough at kind of most of the core business topics and marketing topics that I didn't go to many lectures out of the kind of 15 hours a week that was there. So it
Yeah.
meant I was able to kind of skate by pretty handily for the most part, which was good. I kind of started the agency per se when I was in college, but I was still kind of just freelancing under a brand name. There was very little difference probably until kind of the third year of college, when typically in DCU, it's kind of like a year-long work placement. So with that, you go and actually work in a company, get the value of the placement. So it means you're leaving college with a year of work experience. So I had a meeting with the president of DCU at the time and basically did my work placement for myself.
And was it just you and the agency at that point, or did you have any other staff?
Just myself and one guy part-time.
Okay.
So it was I was not able to make a bit of a business case for like, this is a thing.
Prestige worldwide.
Exactly. Yeah. I didn't phrase it like, oh, there's someone part-time. I'm sure I had a much grander vision and like reality as to what was actually happening, but enough that I was able to kind of do that placement. And after I did that placement, that's when I kind of started to ramp up the agency and get it to a point where I was paying a salary and actually starting to hire people in, to the extent that the next logical dilemma was, okay, I don't want to go back to college now. I have to go back for a final year that I don't want to commit to. So I ended up going back to meet with him. Bree McGraw was his name, and uh, ended up basically doing my final year over 2 years. So my massive commitment of 15 hours a week of lectures was actually only 7.5 hours per week over kind of 2 years. So I remember I was kind of back and forth from DCU into Dublin City Centre to our office now at this point, between lectures, as everyone else was kind of hanging around. And I did feel like I got, because because there was kind of a level of commitment, I do feel like I got the best of both worlds. I was still able to kind of enjoy college in every way that you typically think of when you think of enjoy college. But I was kind of getting some foundations built at the same time with some of that potentially wasted time otherwise.
So do you have full-time employees in your final year of college?
I did, yeah. I had probably three or four.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was
That's
a different
strange.
process.
Not strange, but like, well, I suppose it is strange. It's definitely a different tact to, what a lot of your peers would have been at in the college course. Was it, did a lot of your friends in college know about it? Was it something you kind of kept under wraps, or just curious about that, I suppose?
Yeah, yeah. I think everyone pretty much knew. I think I probably wouldn't. It was probably my nature not to be shouting about it too much, but I was kind of more heads down and kind of got the work done. But yeah, by all means, it was something. I'm sure it was something different. I know only positive feedback from kind of peers and stuff like that. Very mixed feedback from lecturers and kind of academia in general, where I remember a couple of specific instances of people who were like lecturers who were very pissed off that I wasn't playing the game and was making selective decisions in some cases as to how I was trying to use my time. Some justified, fair enough. I'm not playing their game. I can't expect them to kind of score me
Were,
well
were,
in that
were
game.
were they were they not happy with you because you were doing this? Like, it sounds
I
so
remember,
ironic for a business lecturer to be like talking down, not talking down, but like to be discouraging someone from, like, if you were passing all your courses, but to then
yeah.
to be talking down somebody from, putting into practice what you're actually learning in school on the side. It sounds illogical.
Yeah, like I remember one specific case where like there was even just kind of an introductory lecture for a particular module after we'd just done that final, third year placement, and the lecturer was kind of just getting to know people and saying, okay, well, what did everyone do? Well, I worked in DHL for the year, I worked in Colgate for the year as a marketing executive, whatever the case may be, and I kind of said, well, actually, I actually worked for myself or for my own business. I started a business, and the lecturer said, but it's not a business if it's just yourself. Without any context. That was the first feedback. It was like, no, it was. I actually had a couple on the team, that kind of stuff, and there was a bit of a sour relationship from there. So I think I forgoed any kind of attendance grades at that point. I was like, I need to just look out for myself a little bit here and think a little bit more long term.
What a pessimistic comment to hear from a lecturer who you're
Oh,
supposed to
it's
be guiding.
wild. Like, and it kind of that it's just a terrible attitude. And I remember at one point the lecturer actually there was a module later on in the year where the idea of the plan or the kind of the lecture was that you have to do a real business case and a real business. And after kind of a lot of negative comments throughout the year, the lecturer said something like, now you're working with these real businesses to do your business case studies. Make sure like the business owners take a massive risk, like they do something that with no commitment. So be really appreciative of her time. It was kind of clearly a juxtaposition as to how she felt about, someone in academia, in the course, in her world, kind of, doing that, but in a different context, had maybe some blinkers on. But look, I don't hold it against anyone. Again, as I said, I wasn't playing the game, and I kind of, yeah, I wasn't taking the boxes from that context, and that was a trade off, I suppose, more than anything I was willing to make.
Well, I hope that lecturer is listening to this and has some valuable memories from your time spent in DCU. Did that drive you on to kind of drive the business harder or further, or did it have like no impact on you? Just out of curiosity, something like that I think would affect me anyway. I think positively you can use it to fuel your energy or whatever.
To be honest, and actually, funny enough, we in the couple of years after, we ended up that same placement I did. We end up hiring students from that placement over the years. And one time, that same lecturer actually rang me to get like a review or to get like a check in on the student that we had hired. And then
Rang
had
a real business.
yeah, exactly. Rang that real business and had a completely different attitude. So that's one of those things. People can be mad sometimes. But anyway, yeah, I think that actually didn't make much of a difference for me. One thing that was probably spurring me on more was when I was in secondary school, a teacher said to me, with no kind of ill will at all, like really just a genuine nice comment. I'd been doing some kind of like I was kind of involved in kind of student enterprise stuff. And the teacher said, you're a credit, Carl, you like do all this extracurricular stuff and if it doesn't all work out, don't worry. It's fine, you try it. And that scared the shit out of me more than like the lecture that was actually, I think, was going to come for me if I turned my back. And
It's
that's
like
one that I kind of remember. Yeah.
Michael Jordan in The Last Dance, and I took that person.
Yeah, I didn't make that comparison, but I wouldn't make that comparison. But yeah, no, there was no ill will meant by it, but that scared me. I was like, no, I want to do something a little bit out of the norm, and I was probably willing to do something, not do the regular thing because I wanted regular results or something more in that context.
So you've finished college, you've done it over the final year, over the last 2 years. You've three or four kind of full-time employees. What are we talking now, probably 2016, 17, is it?
About that, yeah. So like at this point, it's kind of starting to become a proper business, I would say. We're kind of understanding, I was, looking back, I suppose everything that we did with the benefit of hindsight, I would have did much quicker and much better. But it was an
I would say.
opportunity to kind of learn the lessons that without having to go into a corporate context or a real business per se. I had no frame of reference, no family, no extended family, no friends or traditional mentors that were kind of a business owner per se. So I had no idea what would good look like, and definitely learned a lot of lessons the hard way. But I had the time and the flexibility and freedom
And
to
was it
learn those lessons.
just on that, like with not having like, family or, anyone around you that you could look to from a business perspective, was it just a desire or a love for what you were doing from a graphic design standpoint, or was there anything that triggered you from a business perspective from a younger age?
I think without the kind of those direct kind of mentor kind of figures or any kind of even a business case or a reference point, I think a lot of it was podcasts, like following kind of other business owners. I remember, you know, um, going around this time, around kind of 2016, 2017, I would follow the likes of Gary Vaynerchuk, Kevin Rose. He started
Yeah,
dig.com. Some of
yeah,
these kind
he
of
was
early,
brilliant.
yeah, all these kind of early entrepreneurs who I'd started to listen to, try to soak up information on from, and actually cold emailed a lot of them, and ended up sitting down with Gary Vaynerchuk, sat down with Kevin Rose, Phil Libin, the CEO of Evernote at the time, which was a big enough platform, and Tony Fadell, the inventor of the iPod, and the Nest thermostat. He was kind of in the
All
hotel
through
next to
cold
me.
email.
All through cold email. It was the glory days. Certainly anyone that's doing cold email these days knows it's maybe not as plain sailing as that story. But yeah, like I think I was, I had a real tendency of just emailing people and expecting something from them for, which was like a terrible strategy. But if you can play, and this is kind of going back a couple of years before this, I could play the I'm 13 card. So I got like responses from at this around this time I named the agency a digital marketing agency, Effector, kind of largely web based for context. I'm sure we'll get into it now. I emailed people like Daniel Eck from Spotify who responded, Williams, the co-founder of Twitter, later Medium, and Blogger who responded, Craig Federici, who was one of the
What are
senior
you
executives
asking
at Apple.
these people? I'm 13. What are you saying to the CEO of Spotify, just the co-founder of Twitter? Like, what do you write in an email like that?
So to be honest, I was kind of looking, probably in hindsight, I was looking for a bit of direction, but I didn't even know what to ask. So it was in different contexts. Like,
Fair.
for example, naming the agency Effector. I actually had a couple of suggested names. Cognition was one of them. And I was trying to figure out Effector as a name, obviously you tell these retroactive stories about how cool a name is. It means kind of something that responds to nuclei or responds to change in a non-scientific context. So I emailed a ton of these executives and said, here are 3 or 4 suggestions of names. It was like Ryan Holiday, the author, came back and suggested
Oh,
Effector. Daniel Ek suggested or picked Effector. I'd had 3 options and then like an other option to add other ones. And Ev Williams, one of the co-founders of Twitter, came back and said, what about other in quotes? I was like, that's a very San Francisco answer to get back. But yeah, that was, and I think I was eager to like just try to live in that world. I remember I spoke to, even before this, Louis Mantia, his name was. He actually designed the iTunes logo. He was a designer at Apple and gave some good advice around, like, to be honest, a lot of the substance of the classic Stanford Steve Jobs talk. I'm sure he was kind of, he had that in mind when he said it, but just from a design context was kind of recommending that, like, the Steve Jobs quote is everything around you is built by people no smarter than you. And he kind of put that in design context. Everything that's designed is the sum of its parts. So like just try to dissect, you know, everything what looks like a finished product in any context and learn the lessons to kind of get you there. So there was like plenty of those little stories that was
class.
were interesting, and even as I said, I like the Bebo stuff. There was no kind of major commercial benefit out of it, but I had the flexibility not for it. It didn't have to be. So it was a great kind of lessons learned, I suppose.
Class. Okay, so we're up at like 2016, 17. You have a couple of full-time employees. You're doing web dev. You also start to kind of go into, a lot of digital marketing per se, running Facebook ads, Google ads, that kind of thing. Facebook ads, we talking 16, 17, or are we talking 18, 19, kind of leading into COVID, or when did that kick off? I remember even
Definitely.
my first time like just installing the Facebook Pixel back in 2016, 17, and it was just absolute magic really for the first time. You had this level of insight and clarity and the ability to target people in a way that people can't dream of even doing today, is for good reason probably. That was insane. I'm just curious of when you kind of got into that world a little bit more.
Percent. Like I remember like how it kind of started maybe on first and foremost on the kind of web design side of things, building sites for kind of local businesses, quick and easy, learning that kind of craft, and that logically fed into kind of social and digital marketing. So at the time, I would have actually started with social content because it wasn't as pay to play. So I remember we would do
Yeah.
kind of content, pure content, meme style content for businesses who are putting these kind of bland, what looked like a newspaper ad on their Facebook page. I remember consistently we would get between like 1 and 10,000 likes on Facebook posts for a local phone shop, just with memes that with no paid spend on it. Just crazy results even before we got to the point where we had to kind of jump in from an ad side. Incredible results, and it was probably very much there's a broader lesson in that as I was kind of going where the puck was at the time. That was where the kind of the growth category was. It was unique and differentiated enough to be a social media content driven agency. I basically took that graphic design experience and instead of other maybe, the barrier to entry was low across the board. But because I had the kind of graphic design component, I could create content that looked a lot nicer than other people operating in a similar space, deliver that at a good cost, and which saw businesses saw a really good return for that. So simple enough process, simple enough business model, but that's where it started. And I suppose as the kind of social media landscape evolved, we were kind of forced to evolve with it. Getting to a point where we're kind of creating volumes of content, shifted into again utilizing ads to kind of bridge that gap. And again, depending on the business model, seeing the kind of peaks and troughs of when you have a solid business with good fundamentals, you have a proposition, a product or service that people want, and you compare that with a really good process when it comes to solid design and a solid set of ads, it can really work. So like plenty of different types of businesses where we saw massive results on that
So it
side.
wasn't like one specific industry. You're doing local business, you're doing e-commerce, you're doing phone shops, a bit of everything.
So despite the fact that obviously a lot of the kind of initial freelance stuff I would have worked on was very global, as we kind of started to kind of develop experience, deal with local clients, and with that in mind, it gave an opportunity to work across so many different industries, which is obviously such a blessing because you learn the lessons of a lot of different types of businesses. Thinking about maybe people who start in a particular industry and become, purely market for a number of years outside of college in one particular sector. All the kind of points of reference are all around that, which is great. There's a value in depth versus width, but I found even towards what I was kind of best suited for, that width and breadth of kind of different businesses kind of set me up to kind of grow the agency over time from there as well.
Class. Okay, so we're kind of coming into maybe like COVID times, that kind of thing. Obviously, I know we kind of spoke before. You were doing a lot of, new websites. All these e-commerce businesses came on board, and so the agency, I think, overall went more towards an e-commerce direction as a whole. At this point, like going into COVID, even like 2021, if we're talking that far ahead, how many staff members are we up to there, and what's the kind of suite of services that we're offering?
Yeah, so I think at the peak around kind of that COVID time was really the opportunity for us to scale and grow and take advantage of those kind of 3 or 4 years of kind of lessons at that point. I suppose that kind of 13th of March, I remember the date specifically when everything flipped upside down. I remember within the space of about an hour that Monday morning, I did an onboarding session with them at 9 o'clock. And by the time I'd finished that session at 10:30, we'd lost 50% of our clients and kind of revenue on that basis as well. And to be honest, it was so bad, it actually was just like, this isn't even something I can deal with. Like, I need to just take a step back. And it was a tough couple of days and tough couple of weeks, to be honest, initially. But to jump ahead to the kind of end, to give away the end of the story, as many businesses did, we really saw the benefit of it. I think, across, Irish, UK and US clients, as things shifted, e-commerce became commerce. And our work that previously maybe was 50% e-com became like 80 to 90% e-commerce. And I suppose with that, the kind of depth versus width that we didn't have an opportunity to build before was forced upon us, and we were forced to become e-commerce experts. And really that kind of set the scene for stuff to come.
I actually remember being in Shopify on that day as well. I think it was just the day where everything happened. And I remember it was actually a different Toby. It was Toby who was president at the time. He came on and it's like, we'll do our best. Because obviously Shopify at the time was actually quite skewed towards drop shippers. So China closed first, so all the drop shipping stores closed because nothing was getting in and out. Like, we'll do our best. Hopefully we won't have to let anyone go. And then like 2 days later, he came back on. He's like, maybe a week later, this actually mightn't be too bad. We're going to just hold our horses for another week or two and just see how we go. But hopefully we won't have to let anyone go. And in the following week, he was like, okay, we need as many people to do overtime as possible. And we need everyone to please refer as many of your friends. Here's bonus links, blah, blah, blah. And the whole thing just changed like that. And
Well,
I'm sure to a lesser extent, you guys saw that in the agency as well. Everyone
yeah.
just e-com at one time. It was nuts.
Oh, 100%. Like, I remember like some of the Irish government supports for kind of businesses to move online meant that there was such an influx of work that we actually just couldn't keep up with it. I look back and freak in horror about how the lack of our ability we close leads, we were good to go. Like, everything, we were set up, and a lot of the skill set that we'd built over the previous couple of years just timed things so well. That we were able. Now, at the end of the day, it was our opportunity to miss or take advantage of, and we definitely took advantage of it. It was a lot of long days. I didn't leave a room probably for 12 months. That to be
Not even once.
no, probably not. Realistically, it was such, it was backbreaking work. But sure, look, what a luxurious position to be in, to have work to do, and actually an opportunity to kind of set ourselves up for everything that came along after that as well. So, like, I think there's definitely plenty of lessons in that. I'm sure we'll get to it, but I think when that stuff pops up, you need to kind of double down and take advantage of it.
Even on that note, I suppose, like, you're looking back in hindsight, if you were building the agency again from scratch, is there things you do differently, or what if you were to like look at 16, 17-year-old Karl about to set up a Vector, like what would you focus on? What would you tell him?
First and foremost, I would say think profit first. One book that really resonated with me was Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. And the whole concept of the book is that traditional accounting standards mean that income minus expenses equals profit. And in that formula, profit is an afterthought, something that's an outcome or an eventuality based on the things you can control, which are income and expenses. Now, in reality, if something is left as an afterthought, there may not be much of it left over at all if it's not a key priority. And I think it's probably the same lesson every business learns around, it's easy to be a busy fool, looking at a vanity metric of revenue, and not actually having much to show for all that hard work. And it took longer than it should have to actually focus and make those kind of key decisions with profit in mind. And ultimately, there's a sense of clarity that comes from kind of working backwards from those goals in a deeper way than just setting a kind of a profit target at the end for the given year and kind of tracking against that, but not truly making decisions that are profit first and profit driven. So one thing that I did was I kind of restructured the agency and the service offering to really become focused on the things that we could deliver those kind of profit first outcomes we wanted. So like ultimately, an easy example of this was as social content becoming more commoditized, we focus more deliberately on ecom paid performance. It kind of sounds obvious now, but there's an equivalent conversation to be had for businesses who kind of see that as even a commoditized space. But broadly speaking, making the hard decisions has become a lot easier when you have a clear view as to what success looks like and what's actually worth your while and what isn't.
So first one, profit first. Yeah, sounds absolutely perfect. Easy to just be, as you said, become that busy fool and miss the bigger picture. So it's such a key point. Anything else you'd kind of go back if you were building the agency from scratch again?
Another thing we would do very differently, and one thing that we really learned the lesson on was focus on kind of fewer, more productized services. So if you're trying to be everything to everyone, you'll be nothing of value to anyone either.
That's
And
hard as well in the early days. Like if you'd stuck to
yeah,
graphic design, you never would have got into what you're doing now, and it's a balancing act as well. Yeah,
definitely. There's a bit of a juxtaposition to be found because you need to be able to test and experiment, but I suppose knowing, if what something isn't working
yeah.
to be able to cull that and actually move past it. I think ultimately the productized component is really something I leaned into. Like there's a lot of content or was a lot of content online around, okay, if you're offering a service, the kind of advantage you have is kind of, potentially less kind of underlying cost of goods, other than kind of labor or time. That's a valuable asset that can people charge you for. But if it's just yourself or a small team, then you're kind of very much in control of that bigger part of what is of potential profit, I would say. With that in mind, it was very deliberate to kind of automate what we could as part of the process. So like even back in kind of 2017, we were very driven to like all our kind of questionnaires would trigger Asana tasks, would trigger Google Drive, project creation, kind of create briefs for kind of our one web designer at the time. All these kind of individual components to automate what we can to focus and deliver kind of services and stuff that we actually needed to spend the time on. I think there's a new kind of category of actions through things like Gumloop, and I saw another one. We put it in the show notes, but Zapier equivalents that are kind of AI driven. Where I think Andrew Wilkinson actually put up a link to it. Again, we put it in the chat around some of these kind of AI driven automation tools to actually act as like an AI agent in a way that kind of cleans up the kind of GPT agent kind of tests that people might have seen floating around Twitter maybe 12 months ago have kind of turned into some valuable products that can manage things like triaging your inbox, doing automated LinkedIn outreach, whatever these kind of individual components are. But the equivalent to that was a big focus for us as well.
Okay, so we've looked at kind of profit first. We've looked at, focus on maybe fewer domain expertises rather than just kind of trying to be everything to everyone. Any other thoughts that you kind of, try to incorporate if you were starting again?
Another one would be not scaling before you have your unit economics correct. I think one piece that we did was with kind of, team and is your kind of cost of goods in a service-based business. As we got busier, the intention was to hire more people and without being as disciplined as possible around what was our true gross margin on a per person basis to the extent that you can calculate that and scale something that's actually worth scaling. Often what happened in certain situations and before we kind of adjusted services was anything that's kind of volume driven that doesn't have any advantage to kind of there's lack of scalability. Social content was really one of those things, but I'm sure there's equivalents for agencies today where, throwing extra people actually made us build more of a house of cards. If your margins don't change, but your team size does, that's not as good a business, I would say, because all it takes is a couple of changes to kind of wipe out a profit margin or actually dramatically affect your ability to kind of deliver services at a good cost. So I think another part of that as well, like, team size is such a vanity metric. That's a metric, a trap that I fell into. It's while obviously the reason for that, I want to give a little bit of credit to myself. I wasn't, making purely stupid decisions, only partially stupid decisions. But, it's such a thing that people will be will commend you for the size of your team as like an external benchmark of success. It sounds obvious, but and it wasn't the the reason why I was making decisions, but it's more of a general problem that I think there's been a kind of a nice tide change in where especially you see these kind of lean one person micro businesses driving high profit, with kind of some sort of automated service delivery or whatever the case may be. And that's actually seen to be credible now. That wasn't the case at the time, and nothing other than kind of size of team and all these vanity metrics was maybe leading the day.
Yeah, I see that way too much. Even with a lot of brands as well. Just team size is great, but I mean it's just more cost that you need to clear in order to turn a profit in the business. So yeah, use it sparingly is kind of the advice that we typically tend to give out there. Cool. There are three really good ones. Anything else to add, or is that kind of it? There are three really good ones so far.
Yeah, I think like, another part that I'd really focus on is, I suppose, getting out of the way and not appreciating how much of a limiting factor it is to
Yeah.
be kind of in that service delivery seat and working kind of in the business versus on the business. Again, I think there's a lot of I'm not breaking any news here, but oftentimes the kind of hard truths are hidden behind the cliches. They become a cliche for a reason because the advice is kind of tried and tested and hangs around long enough for it to be called a cliche. And I think with any business, the biggest inhibitor is how you spend your time as that kind of linchpin within the business. As Seth Godin will say, it's it's not a case of you're trading those 4 hours of working on a particular project, diving in on a client opportunity in replacement of getting through this other task on your list. There's an exponential factor to your time whereby there's an opportunity cost that is so hard to quantify because of your ability to actually dive in, create that new service offering, find that new delivery method that's actually going to move you 10 steps ahead. It's not one step as an equivalent as well.
Yeah, and that's easier said than done as well for a lot of people listening to this. I'm sure you probably lived it yourself, but it's so
100%.
crucial. I think that even from a lot of the agency owners we've worked with this year, that's the piece that has got them from a small to mid-sized agency to get them to where they're at today. Is that, and that's hard. It's really hard. You need to be a serious operator to be able to train people to get them to execute on what they're actually supposed to be doing and keep that kind of level of service as high as it needs to be without feeling that need to just react and jump in all the time when you feel you could do something potentially better, but you keep jumping in, you just inhibit your own team from potentially growing and getting better
Okay.
themselves.
And you made a very good point there. And as a caveat for this, it's still something that I think every business owner struggles with. You're in a constant fight for your own attention to be put towards the things it should be put towards versus the things that are commanding your time, whether it's team, whether it's your own inbox. I heard a good quote before, like that's a list of other people's priority on your time. It's not necessarily your priorities. And you have to really be so diligent to kind of maintain that. And one thing that I would have expected when I first started doing kind of freelance work is I would get to a point where I'm fully organized and dialed in and actually can fully move. But it doesn't become easier. You just get better. You learn to kind of live in a certain level of kind of structured and managed chaos, I would say, because that's where you're often rewarded proportionate in life to the level of value that you take on and actually provide to others, and the level of kind of that chaos you can maintain to kind of be a little bit more dramatic about it. But again, there's a reason why as a society we place a very fixed value on a job that's very replaceable. It's kind of the inverse of that for an entrepreneur. There's limitless upside, but at the end of the day, there's not limitless time in the day as much as we might optimistically like to think. So I think finally, the one other piece that I'd really kind of encourage people to take a look at is just get so clear on their KPIs. Because again, for all the same reasons, especially with an agency, it can be very, very hard to know what is working and what could be improved, considering that everyone is kind of gated on, they're kind of guided and kind of um, graded on their own kind of scale. So try to look at the kind of fundamentals. I know one thing we would have tried to always strive for is try to get to 60% gross margins on a team basis, and giving yourself that flexibility and kind of, even if you're doing 1/3 kind of staff costs, 1/3 OPEX, and kind of work towards that 1/3 profit, maybe plus your own salary, or kind of maybe, you might end up looking like a bit more of a typical net profit margin when you kind of take your own salary and treat yourself as an employee within the business. Keeping the likes of rent costs a reasonable percentage of the overall business. Never been an easier time to do that. Making the choice to kind of take on those tools, like a Zapier is a good example, to kind of trigger automations that, and we didn't have to hire an operations manager or kind of a service delivery kind of internal person to kind of keep the pipes moving, and we can actually focus our team on client services in the part that the client actually saw the benefits from. And again, there's I think another piece as well to kind of draw a line under that, looking at again your net profit excluding salary and try adding your cost as market rate. Like what would you actually, if you put your own job as an agency owner up on Indeed or LinkedIn Jobs, what would the price that the market would command or justify for that particular role? If you're not paying yourself that, is there a fundamental problem in the business that actually it's limiting your own growth and actually potentially taking you away from moving into that next level, whatever that might be?
Class. We'll leave it there. That was brilliant. Honestly, really, really good. That was class. Hopefully everybody got some value from that. We got into Daniel Eck from Spotify. We got into Michael Birch outside the Shelburne, and obviously all about the Effector journey to date, and obviously how that's led into StoreHero today. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, we'll leave links to all the links mentioned in the show notes. But yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, guys.